It's time for Recipe of the Day. If you're on the lookout for a Sunday roast that is also a little bit on the leaner side, but still special and delicious, you have got to try this rosemary garlic pork roast recipe. It is so good. So much bright, fresh flavor from the herbs, lots of garlic, lots of lemon in there too. I know you're going to love it. It's also really easy to make because we're making the rosemary garlic lemon mixture in the food processor to make a paste that goes on the roast. So there's not a lot of chopping involved. So it looks special. It tastes delicious, but it's easy. And like I said, it's a little bit leaner too because it's the pork loin. So what is pork loin? If you're not sure, I am not talking about pork tenderloin. That is a long, thin piece. It's usually about a pound. The pork loin is usually more like 3 to 5 pounds. It actually can get as big as 8 or 10 pounds, but the grocery stores usually cut them in half or thirds. Now, because this piece of meat is actually fairly cylindrical in shape, I find it best to find one that is maybe just a little bit longer than it is wide because it's going to cook a little bit more evenly. If you have a really long one, so one of the heavier ones, it can be the case that the ends get a little bit dry before the very middle is cooked thoroughly. So it's much better to do sort of a 3 to 5 pound pork loin than it is to do an 8 or 10 pound one. And if I do get my hands on one of those long ones that hasn't been cut, I cut it myself, even if I want the whole thing. Like if I'm doing a big dinner for a lot of people, I will cut that pork loin into 2 or 3 smaller roasts and roast them beside each other in the same oven. The air circulates all around them and they're going to cook more evenly because they don't have that long cylindrical shape. Now, another thing about this recipe that I love is that it uses the reverse sear technique. You know I'm obsessed with this, right? So basically, we're going to be cooking the roast at 350 for most of its cooking time. Then we're going to be letting it rest. And then it's going back into a very hot oven just for a little while, 10 minutes at the end, just to brown the top and sides. It'll have rested by then already, so the juices have stopped all simmering inside. You take it out of that hot oven and slice and serve. Really, really great technique. If you haven't tried it before, you've got to give it a try. Try it on this recipe. Try it on a different roast pork. Try it on a chicken or roast beef. It's wonderful. Okay, let's dive into actually making this recipe. You're going to preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Get that roast out of the fridge. We don't need it to come absolutely to room temperature or anything, but might as well get it out while we're doing the other things. And then it is getting like a tiny head start on the cooking, right? Okay, then you're going to get a lemon and you're going to zest the whole thing and juice it and put that zest and juice into a food processor along with 8 cloves of garlic that you have peeled, 1 cup of fresh rosemary leaves. I know that sounds like a lot, but it is just so wonderful in here. So 1 cup of the leaves that you've pulled off of those stems. Don't bother chopping them because they're going into the food processor as well. And don't push them down in your measuring cup either. I mean 1 cup of just rosemary leaves as you throw them into the measuring cup. Once you have a cup in there, you're good to go. Also to the food processor, you're adding 2 tablespoons of olive oil, a teaspoon of salt, and a teaspoon of pepper. You can also use lemon pepper, 1 teaspoon of lemon pepper instead of the pepper if you'd like. It works really well in there. Pulse that in the food processor until it turns into a coarse, wet paste. Then spread it all over all sides of that pork loin roast. Then you're going to put the pork on a rack in a roasting pan, fat side up. If you don't have a rack that fits in your roasting pan, don't worry. You can use 3 stalks of celery or a few carrots or even a handful of baby carrots. We're just trying to get the roast off of the bottom of the roasting pan with some space in between the things that are holding it up so that the air circulates all the way around it, okay? Now that is going into your 350 degree Fahrenheit oven until the internal temperature is between 145 degrees Fahrenheit to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to explain that in a second. It's going to be about 20 to 25 minutes per pound. And I like to start checking at the 18 minute per pound point and then check periodically after that. Or if you have one of those probe thermometers where the probe goes in the whole time and then you have a little digital reader, either it's attached to that probe and is sitting magnetized over onto your outside of your oven, or it's not attached and it's somehow like Bluetooth or something. I don't know how. That is the best thing to use because you're going to know for sure when you get to the temperature that you want. And because we're going to do that resting and then heating at a high temperature at the end, you can use that final time after when it's resting to prep all your side dishes so you know that your timing is correct. Even if the roast is taking between 20 to 25 minutes per pound, that's not super exact, right? But Once you know, okay, it's at the temperature I want, then you take it out and then you can do your other things, right? Okay, now that temperature range for doneness, 145 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So back when I was growing up, pork was considered unsafe to eat if it was under 160 degrees Fahrenheit. That was USDA, that was Canada rules. You know, my dad was a federal meat inspector in Canada. He would have told you 160 degrees Fahrenheit for sure, no question, for pork. However, about a decade ago, the guidelines got changed. It's just because there's less of the bacteria that was in pork, less common, and we're not as worried about it anymore. So now the guideline is 145 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you want the juiciest possible pork roast, you actually want to take it out at 140 and let it rise to 145, and it's going to be super, super juicy. But if you are somebody who grew up with more well-done pork and the sight of slightly pink inside of pork does not sound good to you, does not look good to you, then you're going to want to go higher. I urge you to try taking it out before the 160 and give that a try. Take it out at 150 and see if once it rises to 155, if that is well done enough for you for pork. But if you know yourself and you know you like it well done, then go right to 155. You're taking it out. It's going to rise up to that 160 degrees Fahrenheit that you like, and that's going to be perfect for you. That is going to be towards the closer like 25 minute per pound range. And I will just say here, because I know this has happened to me and it has happened to other people that I know, if you do have one of those larger pork loin roasts and you didn't cut it into smaller pieces, sometimes they actually cook more quickly than the range I'm giving you. Like if you have an 8-pound pork loin, it might cook in the time that you would expect for a 6-pound pork loin. And that is just because that cylindrical shape, the heat is getting in all along the sides of that cylinder. And so it actually cooks a little bit more quickly. So this guideline is more for that like 3 to 5 pound pork loin. Once you start getting bigger than that, again, I said cut them into pieces. That's what I think you should do. But if you're keeping it whole for presentation or some other reason, then just know that it might be done before you expect. Okay, once your pork loin is at the temperature that you want, you're going to take it out of the oven and you're going to let it rest for 30 minutes. Now the recipe says to cover it with foil. That's going to keep it warmer longer, and it's going to be important, especially if you have a smaller roast. But in 30 minutes, it's not going to cool down that much. And don't worry, because you're also going to be increasing the oven temperature to 475 degrees Fahrenheit. And after that 30-minute rest time, the roast is going back in there for those 10 minutes, this reverse sear, to really brown on the outside. So now your roast has really rested well. The juices have stopped simmering inside. So when you slice into it, it's not just going to explode with liquid, but it's going to be nice and brown and crusty from those 10 minutes in the high oven. As soon as it comes out, you can slice that roast and serve. I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there, or find it in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/recipeotd. And hey, just a quick note. I'm on a recording hiatus right now, so for the next little while, I'm replaying episodes from the archives, including this one. If you heard me mention a holiday, a season, or something going on in my life that seemed a bit off, that's why. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you're enjoying these older episodes. I am Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, cookfor2.us, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.